What does self-esteem look like? There are some fairly simple and direct ways in which self-esteem manifests itself in ourselves and in others. None of these items taken in isolation is a guarantee, but when all are present together, self-esteem seems certain. Self-esteem expresses itself in a face, manner, and way of talking and moving that projects the pleasure one takes in being alive. It expresses itself in an ease of talking of accomplishments or shortcomings, with directness and honesty, since one is in a friendly relationship to facts. It expresses itself in the comfort one experiences in giving and receiving compliments, expressions of affection, appreciation, and the like. It expresses itself in an openness to criticism and a comfort about acknowledging mistakes, because one's self-esteem is not tied to the image of being perfect. It expresses itself when one's words and movements tend to have a quality of ease and spontaneity, reflecting the fact that one is not at war with oneself. It expresses itself in the harmony between what one says and does and how one looks, sounds, and moves. It expresses itself in an attitude of openness to and curiosity about new ideas, new experiences, new possibilities of life. It expresses itself in the fact that feelings of anxiety or insecurity, if they appear, will be less likely to intimidate or overwhelm, since accepting them, managing them, and rising above them rarely feels impossibly difficult. It expresses itself in the ability to enjoy the humorous aspects of life in oneself and others. It expresses itself in one's flexibility in responding to situations and challenges, since one trusts one's mind and does not see life as doom or defeat. It expresses itself in one's comfort with assertive behavior in oneself and others. It expresses itself in an ability to preserve a quality of harmony and dignity under conditions of stress. Physical manifestations of self-esteem include eyes that are alert, bright, and lively, shoulders that are relaxed yet erect, hands that tend to be relaxed and graceful, arms that tend to hang in an easy, natural way, a posture that tends to be unstrained, erect, well-balanced, a walk that tends to be purposeful, and a voice that tends to be modulated with an intensity appropriate to the situation and with clear pronunciation. Notice that the theme of relaxation occurs again and again. Relaxation implies that we are not hiding from ourselves, not denying our feelings, and are not at war with who we are. Chronic tension conveys some form of internal split, some form of self-avoidance or self-repudiation, some aspect of the self being disowned or held on a very tight leash. When self-esteem is low, we are often manipulated by fear. Fear of reality to which we feel inadequate. Fear of facts about ourselves or others that we have denied, disowned, or repressed. Fear of the collapse of our pretenses. Fear of exposure. Fear of the humiliation of failure and sometimes the responsibilities of success. We live more to avoid pain than to experience joy. If we feel that crucial aspects of reality with which we must deal are hopelessly closed to our understanding, if we face the key problems of life with a basic sense of helplessness, if we feel that we dare not pursue certain lines of thought because of the unworthy features of our own character that will be brought to light, if we feel in any sense whatever that reality is the enemy of our self-esteem, these fears tend to sabotage the efficacy of consciousness, thereby worsening the initial problem. If we face the basic problems of life with an attitude of, "Who am I to know? Who am I to decide?" or "It is dangerous to be conscious," or "It's futile to try to think or understand," we are undercut at the outset. A mind does not struggle for that which it regards as impossible or undesirable. If low self-esteem dreads the unknown and unfamiliar, high self-esteem seeks new frontiers. If low self-esteem avoids challenges, high self-esteem desires and needs them. If low self-esteem looks for a chance to be absolved, high self-esteem looks for an opportunity to admire. In these opposite principles of motivation, we have a guide to the health of the mind or spirit. We can say that an individual is healthy to the extent that the basic principle of motivation is that of motivation by confidence. The degree of motivation by fear is the measure of underdeveloped self-esteem. Sometimes we see people who enjoy worldly success, are widely esteemed, or who have a public veneer of assurance, and yet are deeply dissatisfied, anxious, or depressed. They may project the appearance of self-efficacy and self-respect. They may have the persona of self-esteem, but they do not possess the reality. How might we understand them? We have noted that to the extent we fail to develop authentic self-esteem, the consequence is varying degrees of anxiety, insecurity, and self-doubt. This is the sense of being, in effect, inappropriate to existence. Of course, no one thinks of it in those terms. Perhaps instead one thinks, something is wrong with me, or I'm lacking something essential. This state tends to be painful, and because it is painful, we are often motivated to evade it, to deny our fears, rationalize our behavior, and create the appearance of a self-esteem we do not possess. We may develop what I have called pseudo-self-esteem. Pseudo-self-esteem is the illusion of self-efficacy and self-respect without the reality. It is a self-protective device to diminish anxiety and to provide a spurious sense of security, a device to assuage our need for authentic self-esteem while allowing the real causes of its lack to remain unexamined. Nothing is more common than to pursue self-esteem by means that will not and cannot work. Instead of seeking self-esteem through consciousness, responsibility, and integrity, we may seek it through popularity, material acquisitions, or sexual exploits. Instead of valuing personal authenticity, we may value belonging to the right clubs, or the right church, or the right political party. Instead of seeking self-respect through honesty, we may seek it through philanthropy. I must be a good person. I do good works. Instead of striving for the true power of competence, we may pursue the so-called power of manipulating or controlling other people. The possibilities for self-deception are almost endless. Self-esteem is an intimate experience. It resides in the core of one's being. It is what I think and feel about myself, not what someone else thinks or feels about me. This simple fact can hardly be overemphasized. I can be loved by my family, my mate, and my friends, and yet not love myself. I can be admired by my associates, and yet regard myself as worthless. I can project an image of assurance and poise that fools almost everyone, and yet secretly tremble with a sense of my inadequacy. I can fulfill the expectations of others, and yet fail my own. I can win every honor, and yet feel I have accomplished nothing. I can be adored by millions, and yet wake up each morning with a sickening sense of fraudulence and emptiness. The tragedy of many people's lives is that they look for self-esteem in every direction except within, and so they fail in their search. The ultimate source of self-esteem is and can only be internal, in what we do, not what others do. When we seek it in externals, we invite tragedy. I do not wish to suggest that a psychologically healthy person is unaffected by the feedback he or she receives from others. We are social beings, and others certainly contribute to our self-perceptions. But there are immense differences among people in the relative importance to their self-esteem of the feedback they receive. Persons for whom it is almost the only factor of importance, and persons for whom the importance is a good deal less. This is merely another way of saying there are immense differences among people in the degree of their autonomy. Having worked for many years with persons who are unhappily preoccupied with the opinions of others, I am persuaded that the most effective means of liberation is by raising the level of consciousness one brings to one's own experience. The more one turns up the volume on one's inner signals, the more external signals tend to recede into proper balance. This entails learning to listen to the body, learning to listen to the emotions, and learning to think for oneself. What must an individual do to generate and sustain self-esteem? What patterns of actions must be adopted? What is the responsibility of you and me as adults? In answering these questions, we develop a standard by which to answer the questions, what must a child learn to do if he or she is to enjoy self-esteem? What is the desirable path of childhood development? And also, what practices should caring parents and teachers seek to evoke, stimulate, and support self-esteem in children? In approaching the roots of self-esteem, why do we put our focus on practices, that is, on mental or physical actions? The answer is that every value pertaining to life requires action to be achieved, sustained, or enjoyed. We pursue and maintain our values in the world through action. It is a person's actions that are decisive. What determines the level of self-esteem is what the individual does within the context of his or her knowledge and values. And since action in the world is a reflection of action within the mind of the individual, it is ultimately the internal processes that are crucial. We shall see that the 6 pillars of self-esteem, the practices indispensable to the health of the mind and the effective functioning of the person, are all operations of consciousness. All involve choices. They are choices that confront us every hour of our existence. Note that practice, the term practice, implies a discipline of acting in a certain way over and over again consistently. It is not action by fits and starts, or even an appropriate response to a crisis. Rather, it is a way of operating day by day in big issues and small, a way of behaving that is also a way of being. Since self-esteem is a consequence, a product of internally generated practices, we cannot work on self-esteem directly, neither our own nor anyone else's. We must address ourselves to the source. If we understand what these internal practices are, we can commit to initiating them within ourselves and to dealing with others in such a way as to facilitate or encourage them to do likewise. To encourage self-esteem in the schools or in the workplace, for instance, is to create a climate that supports and reinforces the practices that strengthen self-esteem. What then does healthy self-esteem depend on? What are the practices of which I speak? I will name 6 that are demonstrably crucial. I call them the 6 pillars of self-esteem. It will not be difficult to see why any improvements in these practices generate unmistakable benefits. Once we understand these practices, we have the power to choose them, to work on integrating them into our way of life. The power to do so is the power to raise the level of our self-esteem, from whatever point we may be starting, and however difficult the project may be in the early stages. One does not have to attain perfection in these practices. One only needs to raise one's average level of performance to experience growth in self-efficacy and self-respect. I have often witnessed the most extraordinary changes in people's lives as a result of relatively small improvements in these practices. In fact, I encourage clients to think in terms of small steps rather than big ones, because big ones can intimidate and paralyze. Small ones seem more attainable, and one small step leads to another. Here are the 6 pillars of self-esteem. 1. The practice of living consciously. 2. The practice of self-acceptance. 3. The practice of self-responsibility. 4. The practice of self-assertiveness. 5. The practice of living purposefully. 6. The practice of personal integrity. Let's now examine each of them in turn.